Welcome to the Pioneer series of the CTO to CTO podcast. In this series, we explore how venturing into the unknown, questioning the status quo, and always looking for better solutions in technology and beyond shape the future of e-commerce. Today, our guest is Kelly Goetsch, the Chief Product Officer at commercetools, in conversation with Piotr Karwatka, the CTO of Devante. Before joining commercetools, Kelly used to work at Oracle and ATG. He's known for being an expert in microservices, distributed computing, large-scale commerce platforms, as well as for being a best-selling author. In this conversation, Piotr and Kelly discuss the beginnings of microservices as well as headless e-commerce itself. They analyze the journey online businesses have traveled in the past 20 years and how this shaped the systems, software, and structures within which e-commerce businesses operate today. Let's begin.
Today, my guest is Kelly Goetsch, Chief Product Officer of commercetools, the headless e-commerce platform for the future. I'm really excited we can talk on how the e-commerce technology landscape is evolving and why your next e-commerce platform is probably headless. Hello, Kelly. First of all, thanks for accepting my invitation.
Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here today.
I first had a chance to know you around 2016-17 when you published your book, Microservices for Modern E-commerce. I guess it wasn't your first book.
No, there was a summer there at Oracle. I was kind of bored, to be honest with you, because we had launched a product but hadn't yet seen a lot of uptick. This was Exalogic, and it was fine. I was keeping busy, but I was intellectually bored. Mm. And I'd always wanted to write a book, and I ended up pitching to O'Reilly, and they accepted the proposal. And I wrote it. I took off a bunch of time, and I sat down and I wrote it. And that was a really good experience for me.
What I really liked in this microservices book is that you started from the organization point of view. So it's something pretty unusual, because usually microservices is about some JavaScript, whatever technology you have in there. And you started with the organization, that the microservices is based on the team structures. The whole organization must adopt. Do you think that this team structure is an important success factor in implementing the service-based architecture?
I think it's the important success factor, because I've spent a lot of time in really big companies like Walmart and Oracle, right? And these are each 100,000 person plus companies. And it was remarkable just how layered the organizations were. So I don't know how philosophical you want me to get here, but back in the day, if you wanted to set up a database, you had to have a team of very highly skilled DBAs to do that.
Yeah.
And then you would build a DBA group, and they would own the database, and they didn't want pesky developers like me touching their pretty database. And that's how it used to be. So, if I was at a bigger company and I wanted to get a column added to a database table, right, like that was a really easy thing for me to do personally. If I had access to the database, that's a 5-second change. But in a big enterprise, you have to go through a whole change request process, right? You have to fill out a whole bunch of paperwork. And then they take the request, they implement it in a development environment, and then they give you access to the environment. And then, of course, your access never actually works.
Yeah, it takes forever.
And then you have to verify it. And they have some stupid system that they use to manage their work, where you have to mark it as done in the workflow. Yeah. And then they promote it to QA, and then they promote it to production. And that's why you end up having all of these project managers, because all you're doing is coordinating the work across horizontal teams. So to take a feature from, if I'm a middle tier developer, adding maybe I want to start capturing the customer's birth date. If I had full access to that whole stack, that's a 5-minute change, right? I go to the database, I have the table, I go to the ORM, I expose that property. I go to my mid-tier code where you capture the registration information. I add it there to the form handler, whatever it is. And then I go to my UI, multiple UIs, and I just simply add it, right? That's really, really easy if you had access to the whole stack. But you don't have access in those big environments. And that could take 6, 9, 12 months to make a stupid change like that. And that was really frustrating to me. It's really frustrating because if it's a developer, I don't want to get stuck in these big workflows. I want to get shit done, right? I want to work because that's what I do. And with microservices, you're building teams that are focusing on a business domain, and then you're allowing them to use technology to solve those specific problems. And with cloud today, you can do that because now you don't need a team of DBAs. You don't need a team of network admins. You can just go to public cloud.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really easy if I'm a team of 7 people and I'm tasked with inventory for the whole company, or I'm tasked with a customer profile, to just make whatever changes I want in my stack. And then to the world, I expose my single REST API. And that makes it really easy because now I have a front door basically from what I'm doing. And then everything else is an implementation detail. So I think everything stems from the organization. And actually Melvin Conway in 1958 came up with, it was later coined Conway's Law, but it's that the software reflects the organization structure that produced it. And the old joke back then was, if you have 7 teams working on a compiler, you'll end up with a 7-pass compiler because,
that's a classic, right? 1958. So still so true. You already answered to the question I had a little bit. The question was, what was the microservice back then in 2011, and how did the e-commerce look like back? I mean, the e-commerce projects, the implementation project, how did they look back then?
Yeah, there wasn't really microservices. It was really 2015 when we started microservices at Oracle. But 2011, it didn't really exist as a product, as a company. I mean, Docker really wasn't even a thing, back then. Not that you need Docker, but, that just kind of shows the state of technology back then is we didn't even really have containers. Microservices really started mid-2000s in Amazon, and that was actually a mandate from Jeff Bezos, where he said every service must have a well-defined interface. The technology doesn't matter. It must be externalizable, meaning it must be able to be consumed by third parties. Mm-hmm. And he had a whole manifesto he published and iterated on. But I think that's really where modern microservices came from. And then later in 2013, roughly, is when the name microservices actually started to be used. That's when books started to come out. That was when it really became a thing. And commerce back then, and even to today, I mean, with the exception of commercetools, it's still very much frozen in the late 90s and early 2000s. So you have single large Java EE applications. The source code is there. It's packaged up in jar files. You have extensions that you put on top of it. It's connected to a relational database. And then you have to deploy and manage that whole stack. And they have these cloud offerings, quote unquote, but they're not cloud. It's just hosted, right? It's taking an application and them hosting it for you. For a while at commercetools, we actually had a marketing campaign called "Is Your Commerce Platform Fake New?" instead of fake news. And that was a pretty successful campaign from what I've heard, and it really stuck with people. So it was a different story back then.
Maybe we define what's the definition for you for the microservice? It's like service giving you date and time, because this kind of examples you can find in the in the books on microservices.
I'd say it's small teams, roughly 5 to 10 people, give or take. I think 7 is about the optimal team size. They are cross-functional, right? So there are people who do middle tier development, who do back-end operations work. You have a product manager, and they're all working together as a single team to solve a specific granular business problem. And to the world that they expose, typically a REST API. They also have access and ownership, complete ownership of their data, of their database. So in other words, you can't bypass their API and read from their database. The only way you get things out or in is through their well-defined APIs.
Gotcha.
And then, a few other things. If you can build and release a microservice independently, I think those are also two hallmarks of actual microservices, because you don't want to have 50 microservices, but then all have to coordinate on when you build and release, right? Because that's not microservices. That's just I don't know what you'd call that, but it wouldn't be good.
I think that this separation of concerns, loose coupling, the way you can deploy the services is what defines them. For me, it's one of the most important features that they can, be developed on different paces regarding the team requirements, the user requirements. Let's go into migrations, upgrading to microservices architecture. The topic, which is I guess pretty important for our listeners, because if you are a successful e-commerce today, it means you started back then, some years ago, and you have some reasons to migrate. So sometimes when I spoke to CTOs of the companies that started in the e-commerce journey in early 2000s, so the times where the ATG was the e-commerce sling, I guess, they were saying something like, we started where there was like one or two platforms to pick, IBM, ATG. So we had to build a lot of systems around those platforms, and it's 10 or 15 years of history of building those systems, exchanging XMLs, running raw SQL queries on bare metal mainframe-like servers. And now the architecture is total mess. It's 50 plus different services, and we need to upgrade, streamline this architecture somehow. Do you think that this SOA, so service-oriented architecture, is a way to do this upgrade gradually? Like, why do they pick this way, like going headless, going microservices?
So there's SOA in terms of concept, there's SOA in terms of practice, and in practice, SOA generally fails pretty spectacularly, and I'm not a fan of SOA. So the whole point of SOA was almost like a precursor to microservices, and the thought there is, if you have all of these different APIs, so whether they're REST APIs or SOAP APIs or databases or whatever they are, the whole concept is you'd go to a service bus and you'd plug them all in, and then you can access whatever you want from that bus, which makes sense philosophically. The challenge you end up with is that thing, that SOA layer, then becomes very, very tightly coupled to all of the services on which it relies.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's a tight coupling. It's not a loose coupling. And you end up with having to change, the CRM and the ERP and the OMS and the commerce platform, and then the SOA system all at the exact same time, because they all have so many complex interdependencies.
Yeah.
And that becomes really difficult. So you end up with basically a monolith in your pipes. And that was always the problem with SOA. Let me see if I get this quote right. I don't know who came up with it, but I've always liked it. It's with SOA, you have dumb endpoints and smart pipes. With microservices, you have dumb smart endpoints and dumb pipes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we want with microservices, is we want the pipes just to be plain old REST, HTTP web services, just RESTful web services. We want them to be as dumb as possible, and then have the intelligence all be in the individual endpoints. And with SOA, it's the complete opposite. It's all of there's transformation logic and all sorts of business logic that you put in the pipes. And I think that leads to a lot of coupling, which leads to slowdowns, which leads to spaghetti code that, takes decades to unravel.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So it's still pretty monolithic, right? It's a kind of facade with the services over one or many different platforms, but still very coupled together. You can deploy
what it is, it's the equivalent of like welding together a bunch of big legacy applications, and that's the very last thing you want, is for those to be welded together. Yeah, you want them to evolve independently and not have all those complex interdependencies.
So I think that we have also the second segment of the companies and CTOs thinking on the migration toward headless architecture, microservices. And I guess that they are the guys who started a little bit later, around 2008, 2010, maybe later even, picking some, I name it like all-inclusive platform, like Hybris, Magento, or some others. So the platform that have all the features, the CMS, OMS, PIM, everything with the front end, everything included, so you can just run it out of the box. In theory, right? In practice, it's totally different. But this is how they get into this situation, and why they are getting out of this situation. So what are the reasons they are thinking on headless? What's your experience of talking with those guys, like with the CTOs?
Until very recently, until us, basically, all of the commerce platforms were very suite focused. And that was because back when you were just getting online for the very first time, right? And this was, the early 2000s, and typically the 2000s, right? If you're a shoe retailer and you have 500 shoe stores and you want to start selling online, which is great. You needed a platform. You didn't have a lot of maturity, and you needed a platform that did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And if you look at ATG, if you look at Hybris, if you look at IBM WebSphere Commerce, Demandware, Magento, all of those products, they had lots of functionality, which at the time was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
So they had very lightweight CMSs. So they did the front end. They had an OMS. They had inventory management, right? They had all of these things. They had little things like A/B testing, which today is crazy because that's all very. That's custom, right? That's a third-party app now. You never rely on that in a suite. So what they did is they implemented basically these products as intended, which is with a head on them. Hybris has a whole management layer for UI, and I think what they realized is that over time, there are a lot of websites started to look the exact same, right? And touch points started to look the same. And to differentiate yourselves in today's market, if you're not selling a commodity good, you have to differentiate on experience, right? People just don't go buy a $5,000 jacket, from some luxury retailer because it has the best cashmere in it, right? They buy it because of the brand association, because of the relationship to the brand, because of imagery, marketing, right? All of those things. And you can't do that if you have a really lightweight CMS like you'd find in Hybris or Magento, right? You can't deliver that experience. You end up with cookie cutter websites. And maybe you can change the CSS a little bit here and there, but you're not fundamentally changing the relationship with the customer. So they've all started to go headless. And we actually don't sell to customers unless they've gone headless already. That's one of the prerequisites for using commercetools, because then you can swap out the back end.
But what you said is something I already heard a few times. The opinion that the e-commerce platforms are getting more from the feature-driven to architecture-driven. Do you agree with that? Like the architecture-driven. I like this.
I do.
This concept.
Well, it used to be if you were an enterprise and you wanted to buy software, you'd have to call up Oracle or IBM or SAP, and you'd go through a very lengthy evaluation process. And then you'd get the software, and then you'd have to find someone to host and manage that software. There was a lot of work. You had to pay upfront for the software. It was a big deal to go out and procure and spend $3, $4, $5 million and buy software that does something, right? Today, cloud has completely changed that, because you have vendors like us. You have search vendors, you have OMS, you have 1,000 of these vendors. Some of them do really small things like, I don't know, there's one vendor I saw that does standard date formatting specifications. So you feed it any date and then you specify the format and it'll get the date back that you want, which turns out to be a surprisingly difficult challenge to solve. If you have a bunch of random free text. So it's really easy now if you're a retailer or an enterprise, some sort, and you want a new function that does something, go out on the open market, look at the marketplaces on GCP or Azure, AWS, pick something and try it. And all of these have API interfaces. And all of them, you can typically do a free demo. All of them are pay per month. So you might pay $5,000 a month for A/B testing, but I mean, if it doesn't work after 2 months, who cares? You've spent $10,000. That's it, right? And you get to play with it and try it. So now with commerce, we see the same thing, which is a great unbundling, and you use us as commerce tools for just the commerce part. And we're really happy to do just e-commerce, and we do it really, really well. And that's our goal. And then if you want something beyond our basic search, you can do that. If you want a real OMS, we don't do that. So you have to go out and buy something, and that's fine. And you end up with, you have to rely on a good SI, like you guys, or, go out and find someone, but you need a good SI to pull it all together. And then you build your stack, and it's really easy. I'm not going to say it's really easy, but it's a lot easier than it ever used to be. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use the top notch, like the category winners tools for exactly task you have, search, CMS, whatever, right? So that's the pretty cool thing. And we are naturally going to the next question, which is, so why they choose commerce tools? What makes it unique for this, commerce puzzle in this whole architecture?
They choose commerce tools because we are the market leader in headless commerce. We actually invented it. So Dirk Horrig, our founder and CEO, he invented headless commerce in 2013. That was a brand new category. And it's because of our architecture. We're multi-tenant. Which is great because we're constantly pushing new updates to production. We release to production at least 4 times a day, and we can do even faster than that if we need to. So we're constantly publishing new functionality. Everyone's running the exact same version of our software. We guarantee backwards compatibility. We have a great extensions framework. We're fully SaaS, so there's nothing you ever need to install or run. Our commercial terms are very friendly, so we're pay per month, which is really nice. So for a lot of reasons, architecture, I mean, of course we have great features too, but it's primarily an architecture approach. We are a box of commerce tools that you can consume a la carte, in the same way that when you log into AWS or GCP or Azure, you have a big toolbox of APIs that you can choose from and bake into your applications. We do the same thing, but for commerce.
Thanks for listening to the CTO to CTO podcast. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we'll be back with some amazing content next week.